Take my food and have it all, a kindness no one expected that changed the millionaire's life. Marcus Whitmore had spent his entire life believing that money could solve almost anything. But on one cold, rain-soaked evening in downtown Chicago, the billionaire stood frozen outside his luxury car, staring through the steamed-up window of a tiny diner as a starving young man pushed away the only plate of food he had, and whispered something that would change Marcus forever. "Take my food," the young man said softly to an elderly stranger trembling beside him. "You need it more than I do." Marcus watched the old woman break down in tears. And what happened after that would completely transform the millionaire's life in ways no one could have imagined. The rain hammered against the sidewalks as people rushed past with umbrellas, barely noticing the thin young man sitting alone near the corner booth of Rosie's Diner. His hoodie was faded. His sneakers were torn at the sides. His fingers shook slightly from the cold as he wrapped them around a cup of water the waitress had given him for free. No one looking at him would have guessed that he hadn't eaten a proper meal in nearly 2 days. And no one would have guessed that this same young man once dreamed of becoming an architect. 22-year-old Elijah Carter woke up every morning before sunrise beneath an old railway bridge on the south side of the city. The roar of trains overhead acted as his alarm clock. Some mornings, freezing wind swept through the concrete support so hard that it felt like knives against his skin. But Elijah never complained. Every day followed the same routine. He carefully folded the thin blanket he owned, packed his few belongings into a worn backpack, then walked nearly 4 miles into downtown searching for day labor jobs. Construction sites, loading docks, garbage collection crews. Anything that paid enough to survive another day. Most people never even looked at him. Some looked through him. Others avoided eye contact completely. But despite everything life had taken from him, Elijah still carried something rare inside him. Kindness. The kind that survives even when the world gives you every reason to become bitter. That morning had started worse than usual. A local shelter had run out of beds the previous night, forcing dozens of homeless people back onto the streets during one of the coldest weeks of the year. Elijah had spent hours awake listening to coughing, distant sirens, and the growl of empty stomachs around him. By sunrise, exhaustion sat heavy behind his eyes. Still, he stood up and kept moving. Because giving up was never an option. As he walked through downtown, he passed towering glass skyscrapers reflecting millions of dollars in wealth. Expensive cars lined the streets. Men in tailored suits hurried into office buildings while women carrying designer handbags laughed beneath heated awnings. Elijah noticed all of it. But he never envied them. What hurt him wasn't their wealth. It was how invisible people like him had become. Near noon, Elijah stopped outside a small bookstore. In the display window sat a hardcover architecture book he had admired for weeks. Modern structural design. Every few days, he paused there for a moment just to study the pages visible through the glass. Buildings fascinated him. Always had. Even as a child growing up in a tiny apartment with a single mother working double shifts, Elijah spent hours sketching skyscrapers on scraps of paper. His teachers once said he had extraordinary talent. One teacher even helped him apply to college. And for a while, it looked like his life might finally change. Until his mother got sick. Everything collapsed after that. Medical bills piled up faster than he could handle. Elijah dropped out of school to work full-time. Then came the eviction notice. Then his mother passed away just 8 months later. After that, the world became very quiet. Too quiet. He had no remaining family. No safety net. No one waiting for him anywhere. Just memories, and survival. Elijah. He turned as an older man waved from across the street. It was Raymond, a retired janitor who occasionally shared work opportunities with him. "There's a warehouse unloading trucks near Halstead," Raymond said breathlessly. "They paying cash today." Elijah's face brightened instantly. "Thank you," he said sincerely. Raymond smiled. You always say thank you like I handed you a winning lottery ticket. Elijah shrugged softly. When someone helps you when they don't have to, it matters. Raymond stared at him for a moment before shaking his head with a sad smile. You're too good for this world, kid. The warehouse job lasted 6 exhausting hours. By the end of it, Elijah's back ached, his hands were raw, and sweat clung to his skin despite the freezing air outside. But he had earned $28. To most people, it was pocket change. To Elijah, it meant survival. As evening settled over the city, he walked toward Rosie's diner, one of the few places where the staff occasionally allowed him to sit without immediately asking him to leave. The bell above the door jingled softly as he entered. Warm air wrapped around him instantly. The smell of coffee and grilled onions filled the room. For a moment, it felt almost like home. Rosie herself stood behind the counter refilling mugs. She glanced up and smiled gently. You look exhausted. Long day, Elijah admitted. You got enough for food tonight? He nodded and carefully placed a few crumpled bills on the counter. Rosie took the money but quietly slid 2 extra dinner rolls onto his tray anyway. Elijah noticed immediately. Rosie. Don't argue with me, she said firmly. His eyes softened with gratitude. Thank you. He sat alone near the window while outside the rain began pouring harder. At that exact moment, a black luxury SUV pulled up outside the diner. Marcus Whitmore stepped out while speaking angrily into his phone. At 56 years old, Marcus was one of the most powerful real estate developers in the country. His company owned hotels, shopping centers, and luxury apartment towers across multiple states. People feared him in business. Employees described him as cold, efficient, emotionless. The kind of man who valued numbers more than people. And honestly, they weren't entirely wrong. Marcus had spent decades building an empire after growing up poor himself. Somewhere along the way, success hardened him. He stopped trusting people. Stopped believing kindness existed without hidden motives attached. To Marcus, the world was simple. You fought for yourself. Or you got left behind. He entered the diner irritated after a canceled business meeting and immediately requested a table near the back. As he loosened his expensive coat, his attention drifted toward Elijah's booth. At first, he barely noticed him. Just another struggling young man in a city full of them. But then the diner door opened again. An elderly woman stepped inside, soaked from the rain and visibly shaking. She looked embarrassed even standing there. I'm sorry, she whispered to Rosie. Could I just sit somewhere warm for a few minutes? Rosie nodded instantly. Of course. But the woman's eyes kept drifting toward the food around her. Hunger. Marcus recognized it immediately. He had seen that same look in his own mother's eyes decades ago. Before he could process the thought, something unexpected happened. Elijah stood up. Without hesitation, he picked up his plate, the only hot meal he had probably eaten all week, and walked toward the elderly woman. You can have this, he said quietly. The woman looked horrified. Oh no, dear, I couldn't. Please, Elijah interrupted gently. I'll be okay. Marcus frowned from across the room. The kid was clearly starving himself. Yet he was giving away his food anyway. The old woman's hands trembled as tears filled her eyes. Why would you do this for me? Elijah smiled faintly. Because someone should. Silence spread through the diner. Even Rosie stopped moving. Marcus felt something strange tighten in his chest. Something unfamiliar. Because in all his years surrounded by wealthy investors, powerful executives, and influential elites, he couldn't remember the last time he had witnessed kindness that genuine. No cameras. No social media. No reward. Just pure compassion from someone who had almost nothing. Marcus stared at Elijah for a long moment. Then he quietly pushed back his chair and stood. And neither of their lives would ever be the same again. Before we continue with this incredible journey, if stories like this touch your heart and you want to see more acts of kindness that restore faith in humanity, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. Marcus Whitmore couldn't stop staring at the young man. The diner around him faded into background noise, the clinking silverware, the soft hum of conversations, the rain pounding the windows. All of it disappeared beneath one impossible thought circling in his mind. Why would someone with nothing give away everything they had? The elderly woman sat trembling in front of the untouched plate while Elijah quietly returned to his booth with only a cup of water in front of him. No regret. No performance. No expectation of praise. Just peace. Marcus slowly loosened his grip on the coffee mug in his hand. For years, he had attended charity galas filled with millionaires making speeches about compassion while photographers captured every donation for magazines and headlines. But this felt different. Real. Rosie approached Elijah first. "You didn't have to do that, sweetheart," she said softly. Elijah shrugged. "She looked colder than me." Rosie's eyes watered slightly before she turned away to compose herself. Marcus watched the exchange carefully. Then, without fully understanding why, he stood and walked toward Elijah's table. The young man looked up cautiously as expensive leather shoes stopped beside his booth. Marcus noticed the instinctive tension immediately. People on the streets learned quickly to expect judgment. Or trouble. "You mind if I sit?" Marcus asked. Elijah hesitated for a second before nodding politely. "Sure." Marcus slid into the seat across from him. Up close, the billionaire could see how exhausted Elijah truly looked. Dark circles rested beneath his eyes. His hoodie sleeves were frayed. Tiny cuts marked his rough hands from labor work. But despite all of it, there was dignity in the way he carried himself. Marcus wasn't used to that. Most people acted differently around wealth. Nervous. Eager. Performative. Elijah simply looked tired. "You gave away your dinner," Marcus said. Elijah glanced toward the elderly woman. "She needed it. And what about you?" A faint smile crossed Elijah's face. "I've survived worse." The answer unsettled Marcus more than he expected. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Marcus asked quietly, "What's your name?" "Elijah." "Marcus." Elijah nodded once, clearly not recognizing him. That almost amused Marcus. In most places, his name carried weight immediately. Boardrooms changed when he entered them. Employees straightened their posture. People competed for his attention. But here, in this tiny diner, he was simply another man sitting across from another human being. And strangely, it felt refreshing. Marcus glanced toward Elijah's backpack resting beside the booth. A rolled stack of papers stuck slightly out of the zipper. "What's that?" Elijah instinctively reached for the bag. "Nothing important." Marcus noticed the hesitation. "Architecture sketches," he guessed. Elijah blinked in surprise. "How did you know?" "You've got graphite on your fingers." For the first time, Elijah looked genuinely caught off guard. Marcus gestured lightly. "Can I see?" Elijah hesitated longer this time. Those sketches were personal. Private. One of the few things he still owned that reminded him who he used to be before survival consumed everything. But something about Marcus felt different. Carefully, Elijah pulled out the worn sketchbook and handed it over. Marcus opened the first page. Then the second. Then the third. His expression slowly changed. Detailed building concepts filled every page. Modern structures. Bridge designs. Urban housing concepts. Some rough. Some astonishingly sophisticated. Marcus flipped through silently while disbelief crept across his face. These are yours? Elijah nodded cautiously. I just draw sometimes. Just draw. Marcus looked up sharply. These are professional-level concepts. Elijah gave an awkward shrug. I used to study architecture before. His voice trailed off. Marcus didn't press immediately. But he understood unfinished sentences. They usually carried pain. You dropped out. My mom got sick, Elijah admitted quietly. After she passed, things kind of fell apart. Marcus leaned back slowly. Outside, thunder rolled across the city. For reasons he couldn't fully explain, Elijah reminded him of himself decades earlier. Before the money. Before the walls around his heart became permanent. Marcus grew up in a cramped apartment above a laundromat. His father disappeared when he was 6. His mother worked herself sick trying to keep food on the table. He knew hunger. He knew desperation. But unlike Elijah, Marcus eventually found opportunity. Someone gave him a chance. And somewhere along the line, he had forgotten what that kind of kindness looked like. Rosie suddenly arrived carrying another hot plate. Elijah frowned immediately. I didn't order that. You didn't, Rosie said. Marcus spoke calmly without looking up from the sketchbook. I did. Elijah stiffened. You don't have to do that. I know. I can pay for my own food. Marcus finally looked at him. I'm sure you can. That answer surprised Elijah. There was no pity in Marcus's voice. No superiority. Just respect. Slowly, Elijah glanced down at the steaming plate. The smell alone made his stomach tighten painfully. Marcus pretended not to notice. Eat before it gets cold. For several seconds, Elijah didn't move. Then quietly. Thank you. Marcus nodded once. As Elijah began eating carefully, almost like he was trying not to appear too hungry, Marcus studied him thoughtfully. You still draw every day? Marcus asked. When I can. Why? Elijah paused. The answer came softly. Because it reminds me I'm still somebody. The words hit Marcus harder than he expected. Still somebody. How many people walked through life feeling invisible? How many brilliant minds were buried beneath poverty, bad luck, or tragedy while the world ignored them completely? Marcus suddenly felt ashamed of how many times he had driven past people like Elijah without even seeing them. The rain outside intensified. Lightning flashed across the windows. Rosie moved between tables turning on warmer lights as more customers rushed inside from the storm. One of them, a man in a business suit, noticed Elijah immediately and frowned. Why is he in here? The comment cut through the diner sharply. Elijah's shoulders stiffened instantly. Marcus watched the familiar reaction cross his face. Embarrassment. Humiliation. The businessman looked toward Rosie. You letting homeless people hang around customers now? Rosie opened her mouth angrily, but Marcus stood first. Slowly. Deliberately. The entire diner went quiet. The businessman recognized him immediately. And Mr. Whitmore? Marcus's expression turned ice cold. You have a problem with this young man? The businessman's confidence disappeared instantly. No sir, I just meant. You meant what exactly? The man stammered helplessly. Marcus stepped closer. Because from where I'm standing, he's shown more character tonight than most people I meet in executive meetings. Silence. The businessman looked mortified. I apologize, he muttered before quickly retreating to another side of the diner. Elijah stared at Marcus in disbelief. You didn't have to do that. Marcus sat back down calmly. Yes, I did. For the first time in years, Marcus felt something unusual stirring inside him. Not obligation. Not charity. Purpose. And for the first time in a very long time, Elijah felt something equally unfamiliar. Scene. The storm outside eventually eased, but neither man seemed eager to leave. They talked for nearly 2 hours. About architecture. About the city. About life. Marcus learned Elijah loved designing affordable housing concepts because he believed dignity shouldn't belong only to wealthy people. Elijah learned Marcus built his first real estate company from a single renovated apartment building decades ago. The age gap between them disappeared slowly beneath genuine conversation. At one point, Marcus asked quietly, "If you could change one thing about this city, what would it be?" Elijah looked out the rain-streaked window. The way people stopped seeing each other. Marcus felt those words settle deep inside him. By the time the diner began closing, Marcus made a decision he couldn't ignore anymore. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a business card. "I want you to come see me tomorrow." Elijah immediately shook his head. "I'm not looking for charity." "This isn't charity." "Then what is it?" Marcus looked directly at him. "An opportunity." Elijah stared at the card uncertainly. "Whitmore Development Group." Even he recognized the name. His eyes widened slightly. "You own that company?" Marcus gave a small smile. "Unfortunately." That earned the first genuine laugh Elijah had probably had in months. Still, hesitation lingered in his eyes. People didn't usually help without wanting something in return. Life had taught him that lesson repeatedly. Marcus seemed to understand the doubt immediately. "You don't owe me anything," he said firmly. "But talent like yours shouldn't disappear under a bridge somewhere." Elijah lowered his eyes. No one had spoken about his future in a long time. Most people barely acknowledged his present. Marcus stood and buttoned his coat. "Be at my office tomorrow at 9. He paused before adding quietly. "And Elijah?" "Yeah. Don't stop drawing." Marcus walked toward the exit, but before stepping outside, he glanced back one final time. Elijah still sat there holding the business card like it might disappear. And for reasons Marcus couldn't fully explain. That image stayed with him all night. Elijah barely slept that night. The business card stayed clenched in his hand for hours as he lay beneath the railway bridge listening to trains thunder overhead. Every few minutes, he pulled the card back out to make sure it was real. Whitmore Development Group. Even homeless, even disconnected from the world, everyone in Chicago knew that name. Marcus Whitmore was the kind of man people talked about on television. Powerful. Untouchable. The idea that someone like him would spend hours talking to someone like Elijah still didn't feel believable. By sunrise, doubt had already started creeping in. What if it was a joke? What if security threw him out the second he entered the building? What if Marcus woke up that morning and completely forgot about him? Elijah almost didn't go. But something inside him, something small and stubborn that had survived every painful chapter of his life, refused to let fear make the decision. So at 7:30 that morning, Elijah stood outside a public restroom near the train station, washing his face carefully in cold water. He cleaned his shoes as best he could. Adjusted the collar of his faded hoodie. Then started walking downtown. The Whitmore Development headquarters towered above the city like a monument to success. 42 floors of reflective glass stretched into the gray morning sky while luxury cars lined the entrance. Elijah stopped across the street for nearly a full minute. People in tailored suits moved confidently through the revolving doors. He suddenly became painfully aware of how out of place he looked. A security guard near the entrance noticed him almost immediately. Elijah lowered his eyes. Maybe this was a mistake. He started turning away. "Mr. Carter." Elijah froze. A sharply dressed woman stood near the lobby doors holding a tablet. "I'm Angela," she said warmly. "Mr. Whitmore is expecting you." Elijah blinked in disbelief. "He remembers." Angela smiled slightly. "Trust me. Mr. Whitmore forgetting a meeting would shock the entire company. She guided him through the massive lobby while employees discreetly stared. Elijah could practically feel their confusion. Who was this homeless-looking kid walking through one of the most powerful companies in the city? Inside the elevator, Elijah tried not to touch anything. The mirrored walls reflected every insecurity back at him. Angela noticed his discomfort. "You okay?" "Honestly?" Elijah admitted softly. "Not really." That made her laugh gently. "You know, most people entering this building are terrified of Marcus too." Elijah smiled faintly. "That actually helps." The elevator opened onto the top floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the entire city skyline. The office itself looked more like a luxury hotel than a workplace. Angela stopped outside large wooden doors. "He's inside." Elijah's heartbeat pounded as he entered. Marcus stood near the windows holding a coffee mug. Without his suit jacket, he looked less intimidating somehow. More human. "You came," Marcus said simply. "You asked me to." Marcus nodded once, almost approvingly. "Good." He motioned toward a large table covered with blueprints and architectural models. "I looked through your sketches again last night." Elijah shifted nervously. "They're rough." "No," Marcus corrected calmly. "They're gifted." The word landed heavily. Gifted. Elijah honestly couldn't remember the last time someone described him that way. Marcus picked up one of the sketches Elijah had shown him. "This affordable housing concept, where did you learn this level of structural planning?" "A year of architecture school," Elijah admitted. "And a lot of library books." Marcus stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly shook his head. "You taught yourself most of this?" Elijah shrugged awkwardly. "I guess." Marcus looked almost frustrated. "Do you have any idea how rare that is?" Before Elijah could answer, the office doors suddenly opened. 3 executives entered mid-conversation before abruptly stopping when they saw Elijah. Their expressions changed instantly. Confusion. Judgment. One of them, a sharply dressed man named Richard Hale, looked directly at Marcus. "We're ready for the investor meeting." Then his eyes flicked toward Elijah again. Marcus noticed. "This is Elijah Carter," he said calmly. Richard gave a polite but visibly forced smile. "Of course." The other executives exchanged subtle looks. Elijah recognized those looks immediately. People had been silently underestimating him his entire life. Marcus's voice hardened slightly. "Elijah will be joining us for the design review later." That shocked everyone. Including Elijah. Richard blinked. "I'm sorry, joining us?" Marcus set the sketch down. "Yes." The tension in the room thickened instantly. Richard carefully chose his next words. "With respect, Marcus, today's meeting includes senior developers and city investors." "And?" Richard hesitated. Marcus stepped closer. "Say what you actually mean." The executive cleared his throat uncomfortably. "I'm simply concerned about professionalism." Elijah immediately lowered his eyes. There it was. The reminder that no matter how talented he might be, people still saw the clothes first. Marcus's expression turned dangerously cold. "The only thing unprofessional in this room," he said quietly, "is judging someone's worth before hearing them speak." Silence. Richard muttered an apology and quickly left with the others. The doors closed again. Elijah stared at the floor. "You don't have to fight people for me." Marcus's answer came instantly. "Yes. I do." Elijah looked up. Marcus sighed and walked toward the windows. "You know what the problem with wealth is?" Elijah blinked. "I'm probably not qualified to answer that." Marcus actually smiled slightly. "That's exactly why you are. For several seconds, Marcus looked out across the skyline he helped build. Success tricks people into believing they earned every blessing alone, he said quietly. After enough years, they stop seeing struggle as human and start seeing it as failure. Elijah listened silently. Marcus turned back toward him. I built buildings for 30 years while completely forgetting the people sleeping beside them. The honesty in his voice caught Elijah off guard. This wasn't the cold billionaire from magazine covers. This sounded like a man carrying regret. The rest of the morning passed unexpectedly fast. Marcus walked Elijah through architectural concepts, project designs, and ongoing city developments. And slowly, something remarkable happened. Elijah came alive. The nervousness faded whenever design discussions began. His eyes sharpened. His posture changed. Ideas flowed naturally from him. At one point, Marcus showed him a redevelopment proposal for a struggling neighborhood. Elijah studied it quietly before speaking. You're removing too much community space. Marcus looked surprised. Explain. If people only sleep somewhere but never connect there, the area won't heal, Elijah said thoughtfully. You need parks. Shared courtyards. Places where people feel human again. Marcus stared at him silently. Then nodded slowly. That's actually brilliant. For the first time in years, Elijah felt his mind matter more than his circumstances. But not everyone inside Whitmore Development appreciated Marcus's growing interest in him. By the end of the week, whispers had already spread through the company. Some employees admired Marcus for helping someone in need. Others viewed Elijah as an embarrassing distraction. Richard Hale especially made his feelings clear. This is dangerous, he warned Marcus privately one evening. Investors are already asking questions. Marcus barely looked up from his paperwork. About what? About why there's a homeless man walking around executive meetings. Marcus's jaw tightened instantly. He has a name. Richard exhaled impatiently. You know what I mean. No, Marcus said coldly. I don't. Richard leaned forward. You built this company on discipline and image. People are noticing you're getting emotionally involved. Marcus finally looked at him fully. And if I am? Richard hesitated. Then you're risking your reputation over someone you barely know. The room fell silent. Marcus answered quietly. Maybe the problem is that I spent too many years protecting my reputation instead of protecting people. Meanwhile, Elijah struggled with doubts of his own. Despite Marcus's kindness, insecurity followed him everywhere. At lunch meetings, he noticed expensive watches and polished shoes while hiding the holes in his sleeves. When employees stared too long, he avoided eye contact. One afternoon, Angela found him sitting alone outside the building during break. You okay? Elijah nodded automatically. She sat beside him anyway. You know, she said gently, Marcus doesn't invest time in people unless he truly believes in them. Elijah looked down. That's what scares me. Why? Because if this disappears, his voice weakened slightly. I don't think I can survive losing hope again. Angela's expression softened immediately. That sentence carried far more pain than Elijah intended to reveal. For days afterward, Marcus continued mentoring Elijah personally. He arranged temporary housing in a small studio apartment. Bought him proper clothes for meetings. Even helped reconnect him with a former architecture professor who nearly cried after seeing Elijah's sketches again. But just as Elijah slowly began believing life might finally change, everything threatened to collapse. One Friday afternoon, Marcus entered a board meeting to find several investors waiting with grim expressions. Richard stood near the screen displaying news headlines. One article read, Whitmore Development under fire for reckless leadership decisions. Another headline followed. Sources question billionaire's judgment after homeless protege scandal. Marcus's face darkened. What is this? An investor spoke carefully. The media got photos of the boy entering the building repeatedly. He's not a boy, Marcus snapped. The investor continued nervously. Some shareholders think your involvement appears unstable. Marcus stared at the screen in disbelief. Unstable. Because he helped someone. Another investor leaned forward. We're asking you to distance the company from this situation before it affects stock value. At that exact moment, outside the conference room, Elijah overheard everything. Every word. His stomach dropped. Of course. This was the real world. People like him always became problems eventually. And for the first time since meeting Marcus, Elijah seriously considered disappearing before he ruined everything. Elijah stood frozen outside the conference room while the voices inside continued tearing through what little hope he had rebuilt. Investors are nervous. This could damage the company. You're getting emotionally compromised. Each sentence felt heavier than the last. For a moment, the old survival instinct returned instantly. Run. Disappear. Don't become a burden. That instinct had protected him his entire life. Whenever people got too close, whenever hope started feeling real, Elijah pulled away before disappointment could destroy him completely. And now Marcus Whitmore, the first person in years who truly saw him, was paying the price for helping him. Elijah quietly stepped backward from the conference room door. Then turned and walked away. Fast. By the time the meeting ended 20 minutes later, Elijah was gone. Marcus noticed immediately. Angela met him near the elevators with worry written all over her face. He left. Marcus's chest tightened. What do you mean he left? He heard part of the meeting. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. Of course he did. Did he say anything? Angela shook her head softly. He just looked defeated. Marcus grabbed his coat immediately. Cancel the rest of my meetings. Richard followed him toward the elevators. Marcus, we still need to discuss the shareholders. No, Marcus interrupted sharply. You need to decide what kind of human being you want to become. Then the elevator doors closed. Rain poured across the city again as Marcus drove through downtown searching for Elijah. He checked the diner first. Nothing. The temporary apartment Marcus arranged sat empty too. Finally, near the old railway bridge on the south side, Marcus spotted a familiar figure sitting alone beneath the concrete supports. Elijah. The young man stared silently at the wet ground beside a small backpack. Marcus parked and approached slowly. Elijah. No response. The billionaire stepped closer. You left. Elijah laughed bitterly without looking up. You should probably do the same. Marcus stood quietly in the rain. You heard the meeting. That's my fault. No, Marcus said firmly. It's not. Elijah finally looked at him, pain filling his exhausted eyes. Your company's taking heat because of me. Investors think you've lost your mind helping some homeless guy off the street. Marcus's expression hardened instantly. You are not some homeless guy. That's exactly what I am. No, Marcus said again, stronger this time. You are a gifted architect who survived more hardship than most people could handle. Don't reduce yourself because other people are blind. Elijah looked away. You don't understand. Marcus stepped closer beneath the bridge. Yes, I do. That surprised Elijah enough to make him look back up. Marcus's voice lowered. When I was 12, my mother got evicted from our apartment. We spent 3 weeks sleeping in her car. Elijah blinked. Marcus had never shared that story publicly. Not once. I remember people pretending not to see us, Marcus continued quietly. I remember how shame feels. And I remember promising myself that if I ever escaped poverty, I'd never feel powerless again. Rain echoed around them. But somewhere along the way, Marcus admitted, "I became so obsessed with success that I stopped seeing struggling people as human beings. Meeting you reminded me who I used to be." Elijah stared silently. Marcus took a slow breath. "You didn't ruin anything, Elijah." "Then why are they angry?" "Because compassion threatens people who only value money." The words hung heavily between them. For several long seconds, neither man spoke. Then Elijah asked softly, "Why are you really helping me?" Marcus answered honestly, "Because someone once helped me." That broke something inside Elijah. For years, he carried the crushing belief that the world only took from people like him. That kindness always came with conditions. But Marcus kept showing up. Again and again. Not because he needed publicity. Not because he expected anything back. Simply because he cared. Elijah lowered his head as emotion tightened his throat. "I don't know how to trust this," he admitted quietly. Marcus nodded slowly. "That's okay." Then he said something Elijah would never forget for the rest of his life. "You don't have to earn being cared about." The rain continued falling as Elijah silently wiped his eyes. And for the first time since his mother died, he stopped feeling completely alone. The following Monday, Marcus made a decision that shocked the entire business world. Instead of distancing himself from Elijah, he doubled down publicly. At a massive investor conference attended by executives, media outlets, and shareholders, Marcus stepped onto the stage holding Elijah's architectural sketches in his hands. The room quieted instantly. Marcus looked directly at the audience. "For 30 years, I believed success was measured by profit margins and skyscrapers," he began calmly. "But recently, someone reminded me that the true value of a city is how it treats the people everyone else ignores." Murmurs spread through the ballroom. Marcus continued. "A few weeks ago, I met a young man named Elijah Carter. Homeless. Forgotten by society. Yet carrying more talent and humanity than most executives I've encountered in decades." Richard shifted uncomfortably near the front row. Marcus held up one of Elijah's housing designs. This was created by someone sleeping beneath a railway bridge. The audience fell completely silent. "And if that doesn't disturb you," Marcus said firmly, "then perhaps we've all become too comfortable confusing wealth with worth." By the next morning, clips of Marcus's speech spread across social media nationwide. People reacted powerfully. Former architecture professors reached out offering support. Local organizations offered resources. One famous architect even called Elijah a once-in-a-generation urban design talent. Everything changed almost overnight. But the biggest transformation happened inside Elijah himself. Over the following months, Marcus officially sponsored Elijah's return to architecture school. Not as charity, as investment. Elijah worked harder than anyone. Days became filled with classes, internships, and late-night design sessions at Whitmore Development. The young man who once slept beneath a bridge slowly began rebuilding his confidence piece by piece. And everywhere he went, he carried one mission close to his heart. Design spaces where struggling people could still feel dignity. His ideas became revolutionary. Affordable housing with beautiful shared gardens. Community-centered buildings. Safe spaces for homeless youth transitioning into stability. Projects focused not just on survival, but belonging. Even Marcus changed profoundly. Employees noticed it first. The cold billionaire who once ignored staff members now learned people's names. He increased wages for maintenance workers across all company properties. Opened scholarship programs for low-income students. Partnered with shelters throughout Chicago. For the first time in decades, Marcus Whitmore looked genuinely happy. Not powerful. Happy. Nearly 2 years later, Whitmore Development unveiled its most important project ever. The Carter Community Housing Initiative. A massive affordable housing development designed entirely around Elijah's vision. On opening day, hundreds gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Families, city officials, former shelter workers, students, reporters. And standing near the front entrance in a tailored suit stood Elijah Carter. Confident, strong, thriving. Marcus approached him quietly before the ceremony began. "You nervous?" Elijah laughed softly. "A little." Marcus looked around the beautiful courtyard Elijah designed. Children already played near fountains while families explored the buildings behind them. "You built this," Marcus said proudly. Elijah shook his head. "We built this." Marcus smiled. That answer meant everything. As the ceremony started, reporters crowded around Elijah asking how his life changed so dramatically. He paused thoughtfully before answering. "It changed the moment someone chose to see me instead of my circumstances." The crowd erupted into applause. But the most emotional moment came later that evening. After the celebration ended, Elijah quietly returned to Rosie's diner. The same booth still sat near the window. The same warm lights glowed softly inside. Rosie nearly burst into tears the second she saw him. "Look at you," she whispered emotionally. Elijah hugged her tightly. "I wouldn't have survived long enough to get here without you." As they spoke, the diner door opened again. An elderly woman slowly entered from the rain. Her clothes were worn. Her hands trembled slightly from the cold. Almost instantly, Elijah recognized the look in her eyes. Hunger. Without hesitation, he stood up. Rosie watched silently as Elijah approached the woman with a gentle smile. "Would you like something to eat?" The woman looked embarrassed. "Oh dear, I don't have money." Elijah smiled warmly. "That's okay." Then, just like years earlier, he placed a hot plate of food in front of her. But this time, everything was different. The starving young man who once gave away his only meal now owned the ability to feed countless others. Marcus watched quietly from the corner booth, emotion filling his eyes. Full circle. One act of kindness had created another. And another. And another. The ripple effect continued spreading far beyond either of them. Because compassion works that way. It multiplies. Before leaving the diner, Elijah noticed a teenage boy outside sketching buildings onto scraps of paper beneath the streetlight. Elijah walked over carefully. "You like architecture?" The boy looked startled. "A little." Elijah smiled knowingly. "Mind if I see?" The boy handed over the sketches nervously. Elijah studied them for a moment. Then smiled wider. "You've got talent." And in that moment, Marcus realized something beautiful. The kindness that began with one plate of food had become something much bigger than either of them imagined. It had become a legacy. This story shows how one act of kindness can change everything. What's one way you could make a difference in someone's life today? Challenge yourself and share your commitment in the comments.